So good evening and welcome to this distinguished guest lecture. Thank you all for coming. This is kind of a special occasion and we're frankly quite excited about this event. This is because tonight's lecture falls under the umbrella of a new series entitled Singapore Contemporary Architecture Conversations, as you can see on the sign. This series is intended to be rather different from the typical lecture, moving beyond just the presentation of works and delving more deeply into the questions of architectural practice in Singapore. We want to know a little bit more about the inspirations and the conditioning factors behind the buildings, as well as the aspects of professional practice that influence their production. So the format of the Singapore Contemporary Architecture Conversations will also be different. The presentations of the work will be a brief, carefully selected 15 minutes or so. They may run a little longer, which is fine, for each of our guests. The remainder of the session will be reserved for questions and for discussion in order to learn more of the real stories animating the careers of our most significant local architects, their practices, and their projects. So this series will not only provide interesting sessions for the audience, but is also being recorded as a kind of archive, an oral history for future students of Singapore's architectural heritage. In addition to tonight's esteemed guests, we'll also have later in the term Jerry Ong, Lawrence Lur, Xia Chi Huang, Tian Nanchuan, Chan Sao Yen, Hossein Rezai Jarabi, Christina Tien, Anker Shing, Chang Yong Ter, Ling Hao, and Richard Hassel. It's an amazing lineup of speakers, and we're very excited to have all of them with us in just one term. This series has been supported by URA as well as by the Singapore Institute of Architects, who are awarding CPD points for attending members. So we should say a big thank you to both of those agencies again for their support. This evening, we're very privileged to have two of Singapore's most distinguished architects, Yip Yuen and Kok Hiang. Yuen Hong is one of the founders of IPLI Architects. He was born in Singapore and graduated from NUS with a Bachelor of Architecture in 1987. He then worked with William Lim and Associates at HDB and at Architect Tenggara II. He's also practiced under mentors such as Tae King Soon and Liu Tai Ker. He co-founded Hyla Architects before leaving to start IPLI with Lee Elin. With IPLI, Yuen Hong has designed a series of renowned projects. He's the three-time winner of the President's Design Award for Designer of the Year in 2013, Design of the Year for Hwasun Aerospace Park in 2016, and Design of the Year in 2012 for 19 Sunset Place. Kok Hiang is managing director of his own firm, Forum Architects, which he established with his wife and fellow architect Ho Sweet Woon in 1994. He's the holder of a Bachelor of Arts degree in Architectural Studies and a Bachelor of Architecture honors degree from the National University of Singapore. Kok Hiang's work has been exhibited numerous times, and he's participated in various conferences locally and internationally. He's garnered more than 30 awards, including recently the Chicago Atheneum International Architecture Award, the URA Architectural Heritage Awards, 2 nominations, and an honorable mention in the President's Design Award. He's the winner of the President's Design Award in 2014 for Designer of the Year. And personally, I've had the chance to work with Kok Hiang on the Yale NUS campus, as well as the Roda and Schwartz headquarters, which is just across the street from this building, not to mention numerous EOIs and competitions. I have and continue to learn an enormous amount from his wisdom and generosity, both as a person and as an architect. So at this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Kok Hiang to get us started. Thank you.
So, so thank you very much, Josh. Very happy to be here. You know, when I was asked to give this talk, we weren't quite sure the sort of direction. So I thought maybe the best thing to do is to show all of my works. Okay? So, because, you know, and I think maybe I'll do that, not just show you the works, but also to show you the works in the context of the life cycle of a firm. Because when I wanted to be an architect at the age of 14, it was exciting and everything. Went to university, became an architect, but it doesn't always run the course that you imagine. All right, if you had any sense of where it was going, it doesn't always take the same course. You get diverted along the way. Things happen and so on, but you make the best of it and you create new things. So I just want to take you through that, and I call it shifts because along the path, along the journey, there's been many shifts. all right? And hopefully by doing that, we can learn something from it. The second thing that I want to mention is that we also discussed the issue of architectural language, which is, you see works that have a very consistent language, or works that don't have consistent language, and so the debate about whether a firm should have it, not have it, what's the pro, what's the cons of having a consistent language. So I think that's a very interesting topic, because if you see my works against what Yen Hong will present, I think that you might notice the difference in this area. So let's begin. Okay, so this is just a quick chart to show you the beginning. All right, so starting with schooling, and I schooled under some Singaporean masters, and then starting foreign architects and so on. So I'll take you through quickly the various stages of the firm. There's a chronology to it, the years. Yeah, so there's a chronology. This thing doesn't really. It's not very powerful. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, you can read, right? So the years are on the top, and then the sort of shifts are on the left-hand side. Okay, so schooling, I trained under Teck King Soon, a very vocal, very creative person. I spent many years with him. I designed with him the Kandang KK Hospital, which is a massive job for us at the time. He's very theoretical. He's a fantastic. I enjoyed every day of my work, going to work, because he's always very stimulating, right? So it's just an amazing man. And of course, William Lim, who is the best mentor you can ever find. Very concerned about development, very concerned about young architects. So these are great people. So when you go out, you want to be looking for mentors. You don't really want to be looking for works. Because you can go to a very good firm with us good work, but you don't find any mentors in there. So you'll be looking for mentors. I think that's very important. So yeah, that's just quickly. I just want to quickly run through that. And then I started the firm with Yip Yuen, my wife was sitting in front here. In 1994, at the 1994 when we started the firm, we also had a baby. We also bought a new house, designed a house. So everything happened in that year, all right? You can't plan these things. So in that year, when I left, King Soon was very good about it, my boss. He gave me 2 projects, all right? I walked out. I was going to walk out and take a 6-month break, do nothing for 6 months. But he said, take these 2 jobs. One of them is Kavanaugh, which you see here, which won the Condominium of the Year award or something way back then. It's actually opposite the Istana. And this was my first completed job, given by my boss. So at the time, there was a lot of exploration of textures, materials. This was 96, 97. In those days, Singapore was sort of in the very nascent stages of design. In fact, I think design awareness only really took place after 2004 in Singapore, when the first Venice Biennale, we participated in first Venice Biennale, we will know that. And then after that, there was a lot of, the design council was set up, and then media, the design media came about from 94 to 2000, many magazines. So that was a big push from 1994 onwards. And then we had, I just want to tell you that as a very young firm, we were like 2 years old as a firm. We had great opportunities. We had the opportunity to do things like community center, which I think I don't see that happening now. The young firms don't get this kind of chance. It was only a $5 million job, but it was very interesting. There were a lot of social issues, social spaces, civic spaces, public spaces, everything you can think about that you're interested in. But these days, you don't get that. I mean, I think, you're a 2-year-old firm, you do linkways and stuff. So that's a very sad progression, but we can talk about that later. So we had lots of chance. So we had, I think this wasn't even a competition. I can't remember. But we were given this chance, and we made something out of it. The idea of this project is that it's actually meant to be, they call it cohabitation. That means both the police center as well as the community center would sit on the same site. And that was for land efficiency reasons. So, but they were all fighting with each other, who's going to be the bigger brother, who's going to have the first, would it be the image of the police center, or would it be the image of the CC that took dominance? So we said nobody, except we introduced a third party, a third thing, right? which was this circulation space. So this provided circulation for both the police center as well as the CC. And this became the face of this new building, which is a community building, which just happened to have a police center and a community center. So these are things you can bring into a brief. This wasn't in the brief, but that's what we thought about, and I think it's worked very well. And plus the fact that this estate, Henderson, is full of old people. So we told them that this building actually was on the top of a hillock, but we talked with the planners and everything and managed to convince them to actually cut into the hillock so that the lift could be used to go all the way to the ground for the elderly. So these are things that are not in the brief, but you can rejig the brief to create interesting designs, right, and interesting connections. I think I need to move faster. So and then in sometime in 1995-96, I started thinking about identity. You know, there's this regionalism and all that during this period. So it's very important it was about what is Singaporean architecture, what is Asian architecture. So I went into the search at the time, and my, sorry, I just skipped that. Yeah, search for identity. And that sort of coincided with 97 Asian crisis, which meant I had a lot of time to think and draw and redesign, right? So one of the things that we thought about was the roof, the pitch roof, because I didn't want to see it just as a Singaporean thing. It was meant to be an Asian thing, Southeast Asian thing, so the pitch roof was very dominant. And how do you reconfigure a pitch roof that would meet conditions in an urban setting? So for example, this was a shop house plot, and we did this pitch roof. Now it's very common, you see it very often, but at the time we did it, it was like, whoa, brand new, right? I mean, no one has seen it before. So it's a roof that basically tilts the ridge of a roof. The typical traditional roof has a ridge that's parallel to the ground. But once you tilt it, you can pull the angles every which way. So that was very flexible. And then we applied the same thing to, this was a competition scheme for Sri Lanka in Colombo. It was Art Center. So the same ideas there about pulling the ridges, because these were actually very, very tall structures. They were 9 stories high. So by pulling it down and elongating it, you could actually ameliorate the scale of it in relation to the environment. And then there was a search for use of materials. This was this was in Sentosa, and it's basically using the sort of balau pieces that is left behind during construction, and we sort of made it in the module and so on. And of course, there's the Ashafa Mosque, the idea of a contemporary mosque in Singapore. What does it mean? Do we still go back to Islamic sort of expressions? Not Islamic, do you sort of go back to Middle Eastern expressions, or do you find something new? In this case, we talked about how the universal ideals of Islam could be expressed here and could be expressed anywhere, you know. So just quickly, yeah, this is the mosque. I have to run quickly because otherwise it'll take forever. And then I went into a phase sometime in 2005 where I started noticing that buildings were getting very chic, but they were always gray or black, right? And it's still happening now. Black is always chic. So then I sort of thought that it's getting boring and we need more colors in the environment. So I went into this color exploration. So a lot of the buildings we did was very colorful. If you look at shifting colors, let me just go into it. So I did the science center, we brought in colors, but the colors were never just colors. It wasn't just an application of colors and surfaces. There was always an idea to it. In this case, it was rainbow colors. It was also about using colors, using double walls so that you can create third, fourth sort of gradation in colors. In this particular case, the one on the bottom left is actually the Al Mu'minin Mosque. It's actually a madrasa. The colors were actually Islamic colors, so they were earth colors. It was a very interesting story about this one, where I started, after designing it with the earth colors, I came back one day from Middle East because I had seen the use of black, which actually isn't Islamic at all, but it was used in one of the palaces. And I asked the people there, why is that a black color? You know, because that's not Islamic. And somebody said because in the early days it was built by the Jews. So the Jewish people built a Muslim palace and they introduced black. And this is very interesting because it's cross-cultural and so on. So I came back and then I just said, and I changed the colors. I added black as well, because I think the black also brings out the color very well. So it's okay. So these are again some of the expressions of colors, and then later jobs in Temasek Polytechnic, where we designed a Gloco village. And then sometime in 2007. Again, during financial crisis. Crises are really great because you then have nothing to do and you start thinking and rethinking. So at that time, we didn't have much work. We were given a job in the embassy in Singapore embassy in the Philippines. So we had a lot of time to do that one. And we realized that there was a lot of opportunity to sharpen the experience and to really make the job work in terms of, oh, this is the one on the top left, yeah, this one. And that period also came with certain projects, a hotel in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. This is the arbitration center, and this one is the Robinson Road, it's a commercial building. So there was a period where we started looking at integration of interiors, integration of signage, integration of landscape. Before that, big ideas, Ashafa Mosque, big ideas, but not really carried out in the best way possible. I mean, if you went to Ashafa, one of the bad things is that you see the plant room doors, ducts and everything in the most unwieldy places, which are big ideas but not carried through well. So we started thinking about how do you carry through projects very well, looking at vista control, looking at plans and so on. So this was the period where we started shifting, right, towards care, towards crafting. That's the embassy in Manila, and it's actually, we're very proud of it because we're doing work in Philippines, which typically, the quality of work isn't amazing, construction-wise, isn't amazing. But I did promise the ambassador that we'll give her a Singapore quality, and I think we succeeded. So it took a lot of work, but we got there. So again, it's about crafting. This is the arbitration center. Again, interiors, integration of interiors. Oh, no pictures there, sorry. And then we stumbled into commercial work sometime 2005, 2006. I use the word stumble because always my work has been institutional, mostly institutional, very rarely commercial. I don't work for developers very much. We don't have very many private commercial clients. So, but at that period, I think people started to notice, and then we did get some commercial work. We've done a few condominiums, some office buildings, and so on. And Roda and Swatch, which is just opposite, was also one of the commercial people, commercial work. So that's interesting because it brings to it a totally different mindset. There's money, there's cost, there's speed, which is very different. Institutional buildings, you have a bit more time, right, usually. But commercial is super fast, right? So how do you achieve the same design ethos, same quality, same crafting while doing this? So it was quite different for us. So some of the condos that we've done, but hopefully we applied the same kind of care and rigor in the design. This is hospital interiors in Kuala Lumpur. So if you look at the this bit here, it's a pediatric ward. So we designed furniture that could be moved and changed. So it's actually a curvy thing, but it actually could be configured in different ways. And the reason for the steps is because kids like to be higher than what they are able to. They like to be on platforms, so they feel like an adult. They look at things differently from different eye levels. So these were some of the thoughts that went into this design. Roda and Swatch, German client. Just telling Josh that, well, he knows, he worked with us. Amazing German who doesn't really look like a German. I mean, doesn't behave like a German, but very demanding, quality-wise. Even the lighting is, you can't see it here, one of the lighting posts that we did something like 26 iterations just to get everything right. So they're very demanding, but we're happy to have demanding clients because at the end of the day, it's about quality. Something we did in Sedona, commercial job. We didn't do this thing with the pagoda and everything. We did the one on the right-hand side, which is the extension to the Sedona, just to be sure. Okay, so then we move into period 2012, getting bored with the usual jobs, commercial or otherwise, and we wanted to stretch. We wanted to have complexity. What does it feel like to do a really big job? To us, a really big job, right? So we were very fortunate at that period, 2009, I think, to 2012, 2013, we had two very, very big jobs. One was the Yale College in NUS. The second one was the remaster planning, and we built something like 10 buildings in Temasek Polytechnic. So those were side by side at the time. We didn't do much else during those periods, just these two massive jobs. And again, it's a different experience, right? It's a different experience because you have to organize your firm differently. You suddenly have to delegate a lot of the design work. You suddenly have to be doing design reviews differently, and so on. So these were the two jobs. Very interesting because this was originally designed by James Stirling, British architects in 1992. When the Polytechnic expanded to more than double, to 18,000 students, they had to do new buildings. They had to relook at the way it's planned. So you can see it wasn't very tropical. It had this big horseshoe sort of civic space in the middle, which was uncovered. And so not many students used it. They all walked around it, but nobody ever used it. And that's number one. Number two is that the plan is very linear. So you move, you go to the left, and you come back exactly on the same route back to the center. So it's the same route all the time. There's no multiple routes. So we came in, we introduced multiple routes. So you can see from here, there's another multiple track that allows people to crisscross. So these are new buildings. These are all new buildings to crisscross. So you come back with the original route, or you come back along the zigzag. So then the idea is that to always provide options for people. And then we did other things along that as well, yeah. We did this very interesting building. We designed a building with hexagonal classrooms. Very interesting studies. We did an actual mock-up for 9 months, side by side with the rectangular classrooms. And then after it was used by real students, real teachers, surveys were done, and so on, to understand it better. And then we built it. This was the last building we did at Temasek Polytechnic. It was very, very large. Large building. Okay, so now we are somewhere here. These are our most recent projects, and I call it synthesizing because it's about getting everything together, including signage to a different degree, concept as well, and then also about stabilizing. So we feel that we're now dealing with projects. The ideas are stabilizing. You know, we are applying with the same sort of degree of intensity to every project. And this is the most recent one. This is the sports hall in NUS. So those are the interior shots, and we designed the louver because it's naturally ventilated. So this louver is actually, we didn't want an ordinary louver, you know, we wanted something interesting because this is actually along the curve of the road, Kent Ridge. So this had to be seen in different directions. So it's curved, and the reason for the tilting back is to scale it because it's actually a very tall building. Behind it, it actually covers this giant multipurpose hall. So this actually helps to scale it from the road. And because of that, it's pretty complex because it's triangulated, the louver. It actually brings in wind as well. This is a vet building in TP. Lots of use of colors. Something seemingly boring. This is a nursing home, which is a very, very difficult building type to do because of the constraints. But we find that and also because of the budgetary constraint as well. So we introduced things like very, very deep louvers, 1.5 meters stretching out, which is very difficult for a government job, but we managed to convince them to spend money on it. Using aluminum also is a no-no. Usually for nursing homes, you don't get that kind of budget. But we managed to save on other areas, for example, in the efficiency of the plan, so that we actually have money to implement all this. And it works very well because it's all naturally ventilated. So you don't get wind. So this is the rail, and this is to the outside. So all these areas are naturally ventilated. So this is the only rail area that is open, completely open. The reason for that is safety. because the dementia patients would actually climb over the rail. So they had to be 1.6 to 1.8 meters high. So things like that, you know, and then it's also very small moves, tweaking the colors, tweaking the materials to bring it a sense of homeliness and so on. So it's a very different kind of ball game, but it's interesting. Assumption School that we did using precast. The idea of precast is very big now in Singapore. So how do you use it creatively? How do you use it with rhythm? How do you use it for shadows and so on? So this is something that was finished just 2 years ago, Assumption Secondary School. And the exercise here was actually how do you use precast in a creative way. I mean, I think the spaces are not bad too, yeah. One of our rare condos, this was something that we had a green, it's not a green wall, it's actually a series of green gardens that goes up, that climbs up the tower, right? And it ends up in different gardens along the side. So it's something that can be used because this was a reaction to having green walls, right? You can't use a green wall. You can see it, but you can't use it. So I thought that it would be interesting to have a green wall. It's actually just basically platforms so that you could see it from the lobbies and so on, use it from the lobbies, but it just appears as something that goes up through the building. Yeah. Yes, I think that's, I should stop here. I've got a series of slides about language, but we'll just stop here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yuen Hong. I'm from Yip Lee Architects. I'm Yip, Lee is my wife, so we're also husband and wife team. We started in 2001. This was my office at Tan Boon Liat. Now we're at Pasir Panjang. It's about the same. It's like a sweatshop. I'm a small company. We are a small company. We are about 11 people. The motto of our company, well, I have a motto, is be happy, earn some money. Second is earn some money. Thirdly is to do some decent work. In that order, okay? So I think but so far being happy is not really there yet. Making some money is also not really there yet. Some decent work, I leave it to you to judge, right? So I'm not going to talk about all the bigger projects. I mean, we've done some bigger projects. Sorry, I also brought my whole portfolio because I wasn't sure what the topic is sort of gearing towards, but I'll just show you. I'll just flip through, but I will talk about the house. We do a lot of houses. Okay, I'll talk about this house. This house is number 6 Sunset Place. Now, because when we actually do the houses, we actually have different phases. At this point in time, the phase was that we sort of try to extrapolate from all those old kampong houses. So we have actually very, very big roof overhangs, which is about 2 meters. Now in Singapore, if you do more than 2 meters, it's considered as GFA. So 2 meters is the maximum you can go. So that's why it's 2 meters. No other earth-shattering ideas other than a governmental guideline. And if you notice, these windows that we actually use were, I happened to stumble I went to a timber yard and I happened to stumble into this timber planks, which were pre-cut into sort of 8 feet by 15 inches wide planks, because they were generally used for staircases. So instead of getting a contractor to construct a window with a timber frame, with glass, and then mount it and what have you, so the labor is very expensive. Shaping the timber is also very expensive. So in this sense, when I actually use a standard size timber plank, it's like a proprietary system. All I needed to do was sort of put a hinge in, and then it becomes a window for me. So in this house, we have this big roof, sort of a proprietary system. rebars that are sort of the leftovers from all the concrete work. Now, you must remember this is 2005. So at that point in time, just before the steel was very, very expensive, when China sort of swallowed up all the steel, so this was going to be thrown away. So what I did was we actually use it to sort of to make a fencing. You basically lay them out in 5 layers, and then and then plant lalang in front of it. So when the wind blows, it actually moves, but it's tight enough so that, you know, because most Singaporeans cannot stand on stray animals crawling in like cats and what have you. So it's dense enough to prevent some of these incidental cats crawling in, but it becomes sort of a live element, you know, together with the lalang. So now, so this phase was actually, like I said, the kampong at that house, but at the same time, I also wanted to design everything in a very, very strict discipline. That means it's actually like a 6-column house on a very regular grid. My contention is that even though it's very, very simple and seemingly boring, on a very rational grid, the spaces could still be quite exciting. So this is what we did. And also, we actually used a lot of all this rusted steel. Now, this is before I think it became really fashionable. So, yeah. So this is one phase of our architectural journey. Now, I just want to show this. Actually, this was even the prelude to that Sunset Place. I just want to show this. This big roof protects this middle level, which is all the bedroom level. And then this bedroom level protects this living room level, which is also set in. Now, this is actually the very traditional section that we have for tropical houses. Even in the shop house, if you notice, there's the roof, you know, the main roof has all these sort of rain drips at the edge of the eave so that it will break the harsh light. And then the second level where the bedrooms are. And then at the lowest level, the street level, is actually the 5-foot way. So the roof protects the bedroom level, and the bedroom level shelters the 5-foot way. So it's very, very, it's not rocket science, but it's very, very simple, a sort of strategy towards building houses or building buildings in the tropics. So this is actually what I used. Another idea of mine is that the context, talking about context of not just the environment or the weather, but the context of our surrounding area. So if you notice, all the houses that we tend to do, tend to be a bit grubby and they tend to be a bit dirty. The idea is really so that the buildings will blend in together with the landscaping. And also it has no fear of getting a bit dirty from the rain, from the too much sun and what have you. Now, of course, some of this is not very palatable with some clients because they want it pristinely clean. But those who can accept it will do this. But I always use the argument that I tell them that if you go to Bali and you actually see a new resort being built, and when it's totally new, it's actually horrendous because they use all this sandstone, pristinely clean. It's not charming at all. You have to wait about 6 months or even a year later until it's sort of fully grown in moss and it becomes overgrown with plants, and it becomes really, really charming because now it's part of the environment. So the buildings that we do, we strive to encourage clients to do that. Don't make it all pristinely white and shiny and sparkling. Just make it part of the environment, part of the landscape. So this is what we actually are. Okay, I'll skip all this. And then this is sort of a second phase of the houses that we've been doing. it's still trying to be tropical, but not in a big roof kind of way. Basically, what's happening is that this is the original house, a brick house. If you notice, the windows are all very tiny, right? So what I did in this proposal was that I put a concrete shell over the original house. Now, the functional requirements of the owners weren't that a lot more, you know, because what has happened is I was telling her, you see, if I built another wing for her new requirements, I would have killed up the whole garden. But if I just cover it, that means I expand it radially, I would have satisfied all their requirements, and not sort of killing off the whole garden, which she also loves, you see. So now what has happened with a concrete shell over existing building is that now I have, you see this brick layer is the existing house. This part is the new extension. What has happened now is that I'm able to open up all the windows. If you remember previously, all the windows are all very tiny because for keeping the rain out and keeping the sun out. But now, once I do that, then I can actually open up the windows and protect the inner layer from the sun and the rain. Now, not all spaces are patio. There are certain areas that are used as bathrooms. You see, this is the original house, and this is the outer layer. And I'm telling the owners that the bathrooms can afford to be a bit wet, so it doesn't really matter. So, one other thing is that if you notice, so now with the concrete shell, outer shell, and the brick inner shell, even though we have opened up Hello? Okay. Yeah, so what I was trying to say is that now the outer layer and the inner layer, even though I have big windows, I don't line them up for various reasons. You know, building in Singapore, you know, all the houses are all very close to each other. So you always have a privacy issue. We have a 2-meter setback on the left and on the right. We have a 7.5 meter setback from the street, and another 2 meter setback from the rear. So everything is all very close together. So if I make very big windows and I line them all up, somebody standing on the street will look all the way into the inner sanctum of my house. And similarly on the sides and all the back. But what we have done here is that when we actually do these big windows, we stagger them. So there is a subset of it where you can actually look straight out, but most of the windows are actually staggered. Now, so that you don't compromise on the light and the air, but at the same time, you also taken the privacy issue into sort of solving the privacy issue with this staggering of the windows. So this is what is our second, sort of another phase of our house design. But there are quite a few houses that are done this way. And again, if you notice, now if you go there now, the concrete is really, really grubby. Actually, this concrete is actually using a formwork that has a timber texture in it. So now it just looks like a very, very old barn, you know. So now not all people love it, and not all people even like it. So there are instances where the owner tells me people stop the car in front of the house, and then they will make all this, what is the architect thinking, you know, kind of gestures. And then of course there are some who loves it. They will be taking lots of photographs, you know, but that's how it is, I guess, you know. So see, so this house is actually next to a sort of a Now, it's a huge house. It's a 64,000 square feet. You can actually subdivide into 3 good class bungalow, this plot of land. So the owner wanted to build an extension on the side. Originally, he wanted to subdivide into 3 for his 3 daughters. But in the end, he decided against it. He said, okay, just build me an extension on the side. So what I've done is that I'm trying to emulate the sort of a black and white house language, which is sitting on the site itself, by using a pitch roof, a dormer window, what have you, But now the reason why this is all made out of concrete is because he is actually a concrete supplier. So everything is made out of concrete. The floors, the walls, the roof. Yeah. So, but my contention is that it could still be a tropical house if you create deep windows, patio spaces, courtyard spaces where the bathroom, the bathroom extends out into the courtyard, totally private. So it could still be a tropical space, even though it's not a sort of a big roof building. Even if you notice on the roof here, there is a skylight, because this is actually a water feature where plants are growing now. These little black holes are actually funnels for hot air to, in all our houses, hot air will build up and then it rises to the top. So these are all very old methods of just sort of letting the hot air escape so that the hot air doesn't build up and doesn't heat the house. So this is the phase where we had all this. Yeah. So this is still sort of a double layer house, but with better finishes because the clients are from Hong Kong. So they cannot take the grubby look, so they need it to be very, very chic and sleek, and to look expensive. Yeah. This is all my very, very early days. I'm happy with this because this is my project, built for 450,000. At that time, even then, it was still very, very cheap. The whole house is brand new. But what I'm most happy about is that after it's finished, this is actually the surrounding buildings. I thought it sort of fit very well in the look, and it doesn't try to be very, very new or special, or it's not screaming for attention. So I'm actually quite happy with the house. But the planning is actually just one square where I put all the services in there, and then everything else is open. Okay, I won't go into all this. This is how they are. I've done some resorts. Actually, Kok Hiang and I are working on the resort in the Maldives right now. The idea is for it to disappear completely. But it's we're still designing it at this point in time. I've also done a factory building, totally out of concrete. Basically, it's if you look at this, you can tell. Usually, a factory building is just one big block. So what we've done is actually we broke it up into 3 parts so that it's a much smaller scale. And then at the same time, we sort of carved away this courtyard space inside so that people working in the factory and the offices can actually have a sort of a communal space where they can actually come out and mingle. I think that's it. Actually, it's supposed to be 2 more unbuilt projects, but it's not here. I don't know why. It's not moving. Maybe that's it. Yeah, thank you.
I think so. Maybe now we can just have a seat and have a little bit of discussion. So thank you for both of those presentations. A lot of really interesting work, a lot of projects that were familiar, and a bunch that I hadn't seen before. So it's kind of a pleasure to see, especially some of the older projects, which is always kind of nice to see this kind of transition between the different phases in the career and the different ways of making. I think that maybe your suggestion, Kok Hiang, of talking about language is very interesting, because this is something we really see coming out either through through contrast between the two slide decks, but also through different phases in the works of the career. I know that at Forum, you don't really think of yourself as having a very particularly pronounced language, but more kind of an adaptability or a flexibility. And I'd be, I think, interested to hear, and I think probably many of the people here would be interested to hear what you think of as the advantages of that. And are there any disadvantages of that?
Advantages of not having a singular language. First of all, I want to clarify that even though I don't strive for a unified language across the projects, I'm very careful that within each project, there is a unified language. So that's number one. And it's unified by different things, right? Different expression, different plan forms, and so on. So that to me, it's important. And the reason why I always take that tack is because I work in different building types. If you work with a single building type, it's a lot easier to have a single language, right? But if you work across many building types, from nursing homes to polytechnics to resorts to, I don't do industrial buildings, haven't done one yet, but multiple other kinds of buildings. It's very difficult, for me, I think it's very restrictive to apply a language. And second of all, I also work in different countries. So again, the context. For example, if you apply the idea of a pitch roof in a tropical context, and you were developing roofs that were pitched, and you try and apply it to, say, a climate, an arid climate or a desert climate like in Middle East, you're going to have lots of problems. So for me, the need to be flexible. But having said that, within each building, you got to be, the language has to be consistent. Yeah.
It's interesting because as you were going through the projects, I felt that actually, even though you don't have a language per se, I feel that if I saw a bunch of your buildings in a lineup, I could sort of pick out which one was by you.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what people always feedback to us, that they sort of recognize as a foreign building. And it's interesting to me. I haven't got to the bottom of it, but it must be something in the design process that made that happen, right? But we are conscious of certain consistencies. For example, when we do a project, one of the key things is the plan. And this is highly underrated in architectural schools, right? I mean, both, I think, SUTD and NUS, people don't focus on the plan. The plan is to me, the single most important tool you can use. So when we're doing the plan, for example, there's this thing we call vista control. Vista control is what you see at every point in the plan. What do you see? So we apply this kind of thinking into all our projects. So so that when you're experiencing a project, you are seeing exactly what the architect wants you to see, not because you're seeing something that he's left out or is not designed. So I think that's one of the key things of it, and also about clarity of massing parts, the clarity that must come through. So there are a few of these principles that, yeah.
It was the clarity of massing part that really struck me to see the slides. I mean, because these are all projects that I'm aware of, but seeing them in an order, I don't know if I've seen you present them in a slideshow before, so I haven't seen the sort of rapid succession. But to me, I was really struck by the precision of the tectonics of the building, the massing of the parts, their relationships. And it seemed, having worked together on, well, I mean, not together on buildings, but supporting you guys with landscape, that I remember always at these conversations, there were questions you would come back to, and you say, but what is this part? What is it doing? As things changed, there was an attempt to kind of bring things back into an order or a system within the project that made sense. But do you find that there are shortcomings? Do you get asked by clients whether, for something that would be more identifiable?
I think so. I think there are shortcomings because it's always nice to be able to say that firm does this work. So if you like this kind of work, go to that firm, right? I mean, in terms of, especially for, I think, commercial projects. So if you say you like the Kengo Kuma type of work, then yeah, you go to him because it's so clear that that's what you're going to get, right? Isosaki is going to give us something else, Maki is going to do something else. So there's a clarity about what you get. If they come to forum, they're not quite sure what they're going to get, because we're going to basically start from ground zero, right?
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, it was kind of a wake-up call as an architect, was that when I was driving around with my daughter when she was 4, that she could identify more than anything else Zaha, Daniel Libeskind was broken buildings, Zaha was curvy buildings, and it was like you could sum up the project in one sentence. But it's interesting because I often wonder, I mean, also with our own work, where does the language come from? And it seems that it can either be something that one invents, or it can be something that sort of maybe in a firm where you do some similar typologies and you grow from phase to phase, it just emerges quite organically.
Yeah, and sometimes that process gets disrupted, right? Like in our earlier phase where we were looking at pitch roofs and regionalism and tropicality and everything, we got disrupted because suddenly we found jobs that we couldn't apply. Yeah. Or rather, you could apply, but you'll be forcing it, and you wouldn't be true to its requirements.
Yeah, and I mean, for Yuen Hong, one of the things that's really interesting to me when I think about the development in the, you have bad microphone like this? We'll get one working. Was, we live very close to the Leiden Park House, so I always drive that way on my way out, and I've watched it kind of grow like a sort of organic object, and its appearance is so starkly different now from when it was built. It's like 2 different projects, so you wouldn't pick one over the other, but they're, in a way, like it's now growing, kind of like a landscape or like some kind of an animal. But it seems like when I see the projects in sequence that there is this kind of very organic element in the way that the projects go from one to the other, and the language seems to emerge in a very gentle, a very natural kind of way. I'm just interested whether, was that your experience of it, or is that just when we see a slideshow that we assign that idea?
Actually, for us, I think also there isn't a language, but I think there's an approach to how we actually deal with all the projects. And a lot of times it's actually solving a problem, looking for a solution. When a client comes to us, he asks us to do this, and then we try and solve that problem. So that comes out, the form comes out. Well, no, I mean the planning comes out of that. Now, after saying that, of course, I think all of us have, being architects and then designers, we also have our own preferences of what we like and what we don't like. So for me, I mean, it's like, I do like it to be a bit more imperfect, I mean, one of my greatest influences for design is actually 2 writers, Haruki Murakami and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read their books and I reread their books, and there are a lot of gems in there. Mainly because when they talk a lot about, well, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, of course, is like a fantasy, and then at the same time, there's a certain sense of reality, which I like a lot. Mainly and then I try to bring that into the architecture, that in the sense that that's my aspiration, whether I've achieved it or not, I don't know. But I would like it to be a bit more unreal, but at the same time still rooted in reality. So I also remember something that Murakami wrote a long time ago, but I can't recall which book and what exactly, which composer he was referring to. He was talking, I think Schubert or one of, he composed a concerto that it's only beautiful when it's played not perfectly. That was quite a mind blower for me, So, and then when people aspire to play beautifully, it doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
I don't know whether this really existed, but he wrote about it, and that to me was quite fascinating. And so for me, like I said, I don't have any earth-shattering ideas about architecture, but it's just trying to make myself happy, doing something that I enjoy doing. Yeah.
Do you feel, I mean, as this last phase has developed and the projects have a very strong, I think, very clear identity, I wonder, as an American, I'm always incredibly shocked by what it costs to build a house in Singapore, to buy, and especially in those districts where, if you take the land and then you think about the construction cost. Do you feel that that in any way kind of works against the idea of imperfection? I feel that sometimes if somebody's spending $20 million on a house, that they want it to be perfect, and that I'm always somehow amazed that you managed to convince these clients to make something that is not, and is better for not being perfect. It's more interesting.
Well, I mean, I don't use that I mean, it's a hidden agenda. I don't tell them like this, you know, that I'm trying to make it imperfect for my own gratification. But there are usually a lot of reasons that I use. One, which I mentioned earlier, was about maintenance. If you make it pristinely clean on the external, and you just have to keep painting it every 5 years. If you want to do that, by all means, you know. So if you do it this way, then it has a certain texture, and it sort of it becomes more beautiful as it ages. And then if I actually attempt to do it on the interior, and sometimes I use arguments like when the couples have children, for instance, they will mess up the walls. They will draw on it. I think you can do that. You can allow certain areas to do that. But at the same time, if you do it this way, then it actually becomes more precious, I feel. You know? So I use this kind of arguments to get what I think could be a very nice palette, you know, for the whole house. Not so much of getting perfection or imperfection, you know.
I think it's interesting that if we compare it to Forum's approach in that sense, because when I go and see a lot of the buildings that have been up for a while, including the Boon Tat Street and so on, I mean, I'm struck by how well they age. I mean, they appear kind of comfortable and
yeah, I'm a stickler for perfection, so total opposite to him.
but how do you?
That's why he'll never be able to work for a German.
Right. Not that German.
Well, can I ask a question? Can I ask him a question? Yeah,
please.
you know, I think this idea about fantasy and is really fascinating. Okay, I've never quite seen your work like that, but now that you mention it, I think it comes across in some works. Have you ever thought about whether this approach, this idea of you know, a bit of surreal thing, can be applied to say, bigger projects, more complex projects? I mean, I can imagine in a condominium you can do it because there are always parts of a condominium that are a bit more loose in a sense. Maybe it's the roof, maybe it's the gardenscape, maybe it's the clubhouse. The rest of it, you probably have to do exactly what you need to do, right? You know, units and GFA and everything. But have you thought about how this idea can be applied to, say, an urban situation? If you're doing an office building or something like that. I think it's quite fascinating, you know. It's
well, I think it should be able to be. You should be able to do it, I guess, if you.
I mean, have you had thoughts on that? How do you?
No? How to do it?
Yeah.
Give me a project, I'll do it. No, no. Again, it brings to mind. Recently, I just bought Gabriel Garcia Marquez's his book, his latest book. I think the title is "I'm Not Here to Give a Speech." I think what he mentioned something quite fascinating. What he was talking about is like, you know, if you're a lawyer, you get all the facts, and you can't play with that. And the facts are the things that you need to convince somebody or to win the case. You lose or win by these facts, and you can't manipulate it. You know. Whereas for a writer like him, what he's saying is that he also deals with facts. He takes all the facts, but then what he tries to do is he tries to make the facts sing. So I mean, this is what I tell. We talk about in the office also. I mean, because like I said, we do a lot of houses. So I said, every time a client comes to us, there's a living room to deal with, a dining room to deal with, a bathroom, blah blah blah, all these things. So how different can it be? How different can a house be? Because you're still dealing with the same things over and over again. So then it's our job to make it sing, you know. So I can imagine, like you mentioned, I mean, if it's a bigger building, yes, maybe certain areas you can't move a lot. And I think condos is one of the things that it's almost impossible when it comes to the unit. But the roof, the ground level.
So it's the in-between spaces, right?
In-between spaces. I think maybe you could still achieve some of that, yeah.
Do you think the idea of a larger scale building, I'm trying to imagine like say a public building in Singapore, that we could imagine this kind of language becoming part of the repertoire of like the way that we make public buildings? I mean, because this is something Xing and I always talk about, it's like, are there conditions in Singapore practice that kind of work against certain kinds of architectural languages or prevent them from coming into being? Or is it just a matter of like being very good at describing the virtues of one language over another, perhaps?
I think, can I just respond to that? This is a good, interesting question. But I always thought that if you're thinking about language, language has many sources. So if you pick a language that is global or local, so it's a bit of local and global,
yeah.
Then I think the ability to function in this country will work a lot better. But if you pick a language that's very local, let's say, very local, or very personal, in the case of Yen Hong's work, it's very personal, I think that the degree of difficulty will be there in being able to implement it. So it's really the source of it and the nature of the language.
Mm.
So if you, for example, take someone like, say, I'm going to use examples of years ago, like Caesar Pally, right? Yeah, way back in the, 40s or 50s, right? We developed this perfect facade, right? That's a language, but that's a language that can be applied in many places, and it can be easily acceptable. So, and it's not very personal. It's almost technological. So it depends. I think it depends on the language.
Yeah. And its sources and how well it fits to a certain other context later on.
I think for me, I think the question you're asking is, the answer may be that it takes two for me. My experience that it takes two. It takes the architect and the client to somehow allow some of these things to happen, because I feel that if the architect is fantastic and the client is crap,
Yeah.
the project is crap.
Yeah.
If the client
True.
is fantastic and the architect is crap, the project also is crap. So it takes two, you see. So for me in Singapore, I have a gripe lah. I mean, I feel that we aren't there yet in terms of allowing something different to happen, or a lot more different to happen. Don't know whether it's the people who make the decisions, or we just don't have enough critical mass, so that there is a small group of people who still may allow different things to happen.
Mm. Sort of like we had a hilarious moment yesterday when a client said, we want something completely new. We said, okay. And they said, you just have to show us one place in Singapore where it's worked out first. Maybe I'll just ask one last question, then we can see if the audience want to ask any questions. But do you think that there's a certain type of firm, like a size or a structure or a particular kind of project type, which encourages specifically the creation of a unique language or a unique way of working or an approach, as opposed to a more flexible kind of approach to work? In the case of your own practices, do you sometimes wish you were much larger or much smaller or somehow differently structured?
Well, I actually find that a house is actually a very, very difficult project to work on. It's difficult because usually they are very heavily invested in the owner being the paymaster, and they're going to stay in it. But at the same time, it also, if you can somehow convince them to do things that, or to explore things that you're interested in, it can be quite fulfilling. Of course, it's very tiring. But when it comes to a bigger project, I find that it gets more and more difficult because there are so many more people that you have to answer to. So for that to happen, I think you may have to be to have done some, like you said, some that the sort of a precedence, so that they can see what you're trying to do. Then you can actually achieve it. But in Singapore, that doesn't happen because they are always asking for presence first before they actually allow you that chance. So, yeah, I hope I answered.
So, Josh, you're asking about size of sort of
size or structure or
yeah. So I think that the first, for me, my own experience, the first principle is that there must be designed by one person, and the person must guide the design process all the way down to the sump or the floor trap, whatever. I think that has to happen. So if the person, the single person, is able to delegate that design process or to have very close associates who will work with you for many, many years, 20, 30 years, know exactly what you're thinking, then he translates your design process down to the studio. Then there is a possible, the scaling is possible. But if you don't have that, then it's a single person. Like in my case, it's almost a single person. So I have to see through every project in the office, right? And to do that, there's obviously a limit. I don't think I can run a practice that's 70, 80 people. I think beyond that, it's difficult because you just have limited amount of time, energy, and so on, and the size of projects. So, but the challenge is that then how do you as a single designer, I would delegate is not a good word. So how do you clone 3 or 4 designers who think exactly like you? And people like Foster's, I believe, has done that. He's got very, very close associates who knows exactly what to do, exactly how you would think. Yeah. Hasn't happened with me. I don't see it happening a lot in Singapore, right? So I don't know.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good point to open up to some questions. If anyone from the audience would like to ask a question, we have 2 microphones. So. This is when we need Ronald.
I didn't specifically create a question, but it's wonderful when you get to ask a question to your former boss and you're a former employee, but now in a completely different deal. But here is one. Both of you, Yuen Hong and Kok Hiang, graduated from NUS at a specific period in time, pretty much the same generation, and same year even. And this is a time when, and still today, NUS sort of stands for this idea of tropicality. They always tell you what is tropical architecture. Tropicality, tropicality. We must know our drip lines, we must know our water, we must know that we're in this kind of setting, and there is almost sort of, there's an idea that we always respect vernacular architecture, how it performs, and that kind of thing. As practitioners today, let's say designing very contemporary kind of architecture, and as your tropicality becomes something more concrete in some instance, or for some other becomes like local, how do you redefine or expand that definition today of tropical architecture?
It's a complex question.
Yeah. Can you like say the question in 2 lines or something? I don't quite get your question. As in compare with the student days? Well, student days, you don't have to put up buildings. So it's a lot different that way. Here you have to contend with real issues, real users. Is that your question? I don't.
Let's say you started learning and working for Kingswood, and Kingswood has a particular brand of tropical architecture that talks about line, edge, and shape very specifically. And today we are no longer in the era. Today nobody agrees that we should do deep roofs. Nobody agrees that we should necessarily do verandas
I don't know. I think we need to focus on tropical architecture insofar as it's relevant. I mean, if you're designing a naturally ventilated building and naturally ventilated spaces with indoor-outdoor sort of connections, then you need to have some regard for what that entails. But whether you're specifically applying a specific language, right, that's a different question that we've been pondering. You know, whether you apply a language which is local or global, I think it's a separate issue.
Yes.
I think all our buildings are tropical, but we have sort of like, you know, it's basic. It just have to be tropical. So if you look at the University Sports Center, it's actually there are a lot of passive ventilation and all that. You know, it doesn't have the pitch roof or whatever, but it is a tropical building. But we are not actually looking at that issue of tropicality in that USC is not the main issue. The main issue is about sports, the enjoyment of sports, you know, the enjoyment of the educational spaces, collaborative spaces. So I think some of the issues actually presented is about, we're sort of like moving on to transformative kind of spaces, like how you transform behavior. Like you walk through the sports center, how you actually transform behavior, right? But it's tropical.
Maybe I can weaponize that question. I think recently the tropical aspect, I mean, to me, has become also a branch of it, a kind of a very clear image that projects the idea of what a tropical city should look like. So I think of a building like, okay, so Richard is coming in a couple of weeks. Pickering on Park Royal, which has become a kind of web darling because it looks as green as everyone kind of expects it to be. I'm interested to know how you feel about that. I mean, do we feel that the image of this place needs to be expressed in some way through a relationship to climate, or do you think there are other ways that we can kind of establish a sense of place in our own works?
I think I go back to my earlier point that if a situation calls for it, like in the case of Pickering in the hotel, there are a lot of extended areas, there are a lot of outside areas, in between spaces, which hotel guests would like to enjoy. I mean, that's the reason why they're in Singapore, right? So the kind of architectural response then calls for a tropical response. And in the case of Pickering Street Hotel, it's a green response, right? It's a response with very explicit expression of green. And that's a formula, that's a language that is, I think, well applied and probably appropriate. Mm. Yeah.
I think, let me try and answer Ronald's question. For me, tropical, actually when we actually talk about tropical architecture, most people tend to think that it's something bad to deal with. That means, oh, it's too much sun, you got to cut it out. It's too much rain, you got to keep it off. But if you turn it the other way around, if you exalt it and make it into something, there are instances where you have to keep it out and keep everything out, the sun and the rain. But if you turn it the other way around, maybe there's another way to look at tropicality. That means you celebrate it. You actually welcome the rain, welcome the sun, but in a way that is still usable and habitable. So maybe that's another possibility to view it.
So not as a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So
yeah, that sounds really good, but I can tell you, my years, 20 years of doing it in public buildings, I'm not going to take that tack. I can't see a way.
That's what I mean. It takes two.
Public buildings in particular, right? Because you have a third-party person, and you're not an owner who is happy to say, I don't mind having wet floors. My own house is always wet because I embrace this tropicality. But to do it for a public building where there's a person who may slip, and also it's just so difficult.
I mean, Kevin Marlowe did an office building in KL. It's all brick, very tropical, gets wet all the time. But there's a client who actually allows him to do it. Now, how well it works, of course, I'm sure, yes, there'll be people who grumble that walkways are wet and whatever. But there are people like that. Is it a good building? Or I enjoy it, whether you like it or not. I guess you can never satisfy everybody, but I guess you can just do whatever you think is the right thing to do. You know.
Do we have any last question from the audience? I think we've gotten to the point where we can wrap up soon, but maybe if there's one last burning question. Oscar, yes.
I think just before we started, I was just mentioning that I think the education of an architect or a designer is fantastic. Whatever we go through, basically all these years that we go through the architectural education is to teach us to zoom into very, very detailed micro things. At the same time, to zoom out, to think of very macro and worldly things at the same, all at the same time. Now, I think this kind of training is quite unique for us. And to me, just take the training, but you don't really have to be an architect in the end, because it will equip you to do a lot of other things. In all aspects of our life, we require this kind of thinking, and we require this kind of zooming in and zooming out. And you could be anything you want. You don't necessarily have to be an architect, unless you really, really want to, you know. So my advice is that if I'm in my 40s now, I would seriously consider doing varied things with design, rather than just pure architecture, in this context.
I would say that if you are trained as an architect, you choose to become an architect, Yan Hong is absolutely right, you don't have to be one, but if you choose to become one, then to me, the singular most important thing is to believe that design can affect lives. You have to have that conviction. If you don't have that conviction, be something else. There's really no point. So you got to have the conviction that design, architecture actually influences positively, good architecture influences positively lives. Then I think that gives you the inspiration, that gives you the fortitude, that gives you the commitment to want to design good buildings. And that's what I hang on to every day. The day that I lose belief in that, there's really no point doing it. So I think that's something that you need to dig very deeply, understand design, look at buildings. Could it be done better? Is this done well? How does it affect people's lives when they go through it? Right? I think there needs to be that really heartfelt belief. Without that, I think you have very little to go on. It's a very tough profession. It's super tough. So if you don't have that belief, I don't know what else you can hang on to. You can't hang on to money. There's no money in it. What else can you hang on to? Enjoyment? To see a building built? Yeah, great for a while, for the first 3 days, right? And after they get bored with it. What else? I don't see anything else. The only thing is this commitment to say that every time you have... I remember my first experience of space. The first experience of space when you see 3 columns. 2 columns, no space. 3 columns, there's a sense of space. And it was a very... that's after 1 year of working, okay, drawing and toiling, and then I see 3 columns. And it really hit me that, we are the only profession that creates space, right? And that's what people live in. People live in space. So we are the only profession. So we're the guardians of space. We're the guardians of design. It's very powerful if you think of it that way.
Well, I think that's a strong and inspiring point on which to close. So can we please thank our 2 guests tonight for a wonderful presentation. And please join us for future sessions.